Hey everyone, welcome back to InfoGamer. My name's Nathan and I'm going to do another journal entry. So in this video, we're going to be talking about something that I recently learned about buttons. Now buttons are super awesome. They're really helpful. We've used them before in other videos. Buttons are most commonly used for mobile games, but they can be used in computer games. Say you have like a menu and you use the mouse to click on a button. But we use them in mobile games because smartphones don't have input devices. So we use buttons to control players or to cause a gun to shoot or a player to jump. We can also use them for menu systems, which are super important. Now, in our other videos where we've shown you how to use a button, we show you how to create a public function and then assign that function to a specific button. And what I recently learned is how to add a parameter to your function and then assign a value to that parameter in the inspector. And I'll tell you why this is helpful and important, but first let's show you how to do it. So for those of you that don't know how to create a button, it's super easy. You go to your hierarchy window and where it says create, click on that. You go down to UI, which stands for user interface. Then you find where it says button. Once you click on that, it'll create a button for you in your hierarchy and it'll be a child to the canvas. Now if you don't have any UI elements in your game yet, once you create a button, it'll automatically create a canvas for you. If you already have some UI elements in your game, then it'll add your button to your current canvas. So let's go ahead and click on our button, and you can see these are all the components that we have for this current button. These are the default components, and under our button script in our inspector, you can see this on-click field. Now, we're going to show you how to use this, but to do so, we need to first create some public functions. And so I've gone ahead and created a new script, and I just called it buttons because this is an example. And so let's go ahead and open our button script in Visual Studios. Once it's open in Visual Studios, you'll see that we have two variables. One is a public integer that I've called testInt, and then another is a public string that I've called testString. And then we have three different functions. Now, the first function is just a standard public function that we've used before for buttons. Now, I have public void, so public is the access type, and this is what makes it so that we can actually assign this function to a button. If we didn't have public in front, then we wouldn't be able to see it in the drop-down list of all the functions we can use. Void is the return type, button is the name of our function, and then in parentheses, this is where we're going to add parameters in our future examples down here. But in this function, we just debug a message to the console that says the button was clicked. So let's go ahead and show you how to assign this function to our button in Unity. So if we go back to Unity, you'll see that we have created a game object that we've called button script. Now this is just an empty game object that we've attached our button script to and added it as a component. So if you don't know how to do this, it's also really easy. You go to your hierarchy, click on create, and then create empty. It'll create a new game object, and then you just click on your button script and drag it on like this, and then let go, and it'll add that component to your game object. So here you can see these are our two public variables. Now what we need to do is attach this to our on-click field. So we go down. Once we select our button, we go down to our button script, click this plus sign, and you'll see that it adds these options. And then what we need to do is click on our button script game object and drag it into this field here. And then on our drop-down menu, we click that, go to our button script, and then find our button function. So this is the default function that I was showing you in our code. So once we've assigned our public function, we can go to the play button. We'll hit play, and then as we click on our button in our game view, you'll see that we now have this message logged to the console that says the button was clicked. And every time we click our button, the number here is incremented because we've clicked it 3 times, so this message has been displayed 3 times to the console. So let's go back to our code. Now normally when you have your function for your button, you would have other code in the body of your function that would do different stuff. Maybe it would load a new level, or if it's part of your menu, or it would display different options. It could even move a player or cause a player to jump. But let's move on. We have next an example of our button function, but we've added a parameter which is of type int. So we have public void, that's all the same. Then we give it a different name. Then in the parentheses, we add the data type, which is integer, and we give our parameter a name. In this function, we are taking our test_int variable and we are saving our parameter value into it. So once we click the button, this test_int value, which is currently 0, will then become whatever we assign our parameter in the inspector. Then we are debugging a message to the console that says the button was clicked and the test is now equal to, this is like a way of saying equal to, then the value. And I'm actually going to change this to test_int because we're not testing the parameter int, we're testing the test_int. Lots of words. So let's go ahead and test this. Save it, go back to Unity. Then, because we've already added our button script to our button, we need to just go to our drop-down menu and then find our button param int function. But before I click on it, I want you to pay attention to this space right here under our drop-down menu. So currently there's nothing there, but as I select that function, you can see that there's a new field, and currently it's set to 0 because that's the default for integers. But let's change this value, and I'm going to set it to, let's say, 32. So now, as we play our game, I'm going to go ahead and select our body script because that's where you're going to see this variable affected by our button. So as I click on our button, there will be a message that's displayed to the console, and then this value, test_int, is going to change from 0 to 32. So let's go ahead and hit the button. You'll see that our message is displayed, the button was clicked, and the test is now 32. And sure enough, in our inspector, test_int is equal to 32. Let's go back to Visual Studios and we'll show you this last example where we've changed our parameter from an int to a string. So it's pretty much the same function. We have public void button param string is the name of our function. Then our parameter is of type string, and we've called it param string. We're taking our test string variable and we're saving the value of param string into it. Then we're debugging a new message that says test string is now, and then we give the value. So let's go ahead, save that, make sure it's saved, go back to Unity. Then we need to click on our button, go down to the on click, find the new function right here, and you'll see that this field is now empty. That's because the default value for a string is null, which means it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and assign a value. So let's say hello world, exclamation point. So now if we hit play, and let's select our button script game object, as I click the button, you'll see a new message appear that will say something like whatever we said. The value of test now is now equal to hello world. And then this test string will then become hello world. So as I click the button, boom, test string is now hello world. And sure enough, in the inspector, hello world. Now, you might be wondering, when am I ever going to need to use a function, a public function that has a parameter that I assign to a button rather than just a normal default public function with no parameters? Now, I actually recently used this principle on one of my own projects that I was working on. I had a situation where I had a bunch of buttons that were doing really similar things, and I was like, man, I really don't want to code a whole bunch of different public functions that each one only had slight variations between each other and have like 20 different functions that I would have to type out. And then I was like, I wonder if I can add a parameter to this function and then just change the value, and then according to the value do different things. And so that's when you're going to want to use a parameter. So it's in the cases where you have a bunch of buttons that do really similar things, but the values in the functions are different. So for example, you might have a menu system where people can pick different skins. And so you would have like all these buttons that, and you would only need to write one function for all the buttons, but then you would assign different values. So you would have a button, let's see, I'll show you. So let's duplicate our button. I didn't duplicate. Duplicate. There we go. So I have two buttons. I'm going to change the position in the Y direction. Let's assign one of them with the integer function, and let's make this value 32. And then the second button, let's assign it with the same function, but change it to 64. So now, as we hit play, if we click the first button, you'll see that it displays this message with 32. And if we go to our button script game object, test int is 32. But if we click on our second button, it displays a different message, and the test int value is now 64. So now this is a little arbitrary and might be a bit confusing, but I hope you understand the principle and when you can use parameters for your buttons. Whew! Glad we got through all that. It was a lot of information, a lot of words. If it's any bit confusing and you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Now, make sure you like and subscribe and share with your friends, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.